Welcome to the Real Talk with Megan podcast, where we have candid conversations about the things that matter most. I'm your host, Megan, and we're going to deep dive into the topic of mental health. In a world where we're constantly pressured to perform, achieve, and excel, it's easy to neglect our mental health. But the truth is, mental health is just as important as physical health, and it's time we started treating it as such. Join the conversation as we explore the complexities of mental health issues and speak with experts, advocates, and individuals who have lived through these challenges. Together, we'll work to destigmatize mental health and start conversations. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and get ready for a real and raw conversation about mental health on the Real Talk with Megan podcast. We have all heard the story of Jesus' birth probably more times than we can count. And when someone talks about the nativity scene, you might even have a specific image that pops into your head. Like, for example, the shepherds. When you think about the shepherds, does an image of a middle-aged man with a beard come to mind? If so, you're not alone. And until a while ago, I would have pictured the exact same thing. It's all around us. Every nativity set has a few middle-aged men with a lamb by their side, and even sermons that are preached describe these shepherds as the lowest of low men in that culture. But I'm going to plead the case that the shepherds were not middle-aged men. Okay, so now that poses the question. If they're not middle-aged men, who were they? Well, let me start with some facts. In Luke 2, we have the story of the birth of Jesus. Actually, in Luke 2:8 is where it starts talking about the shepherds. Each time we see the shepherds mentioned, they're in a group. They usually use the terms they, us, or the shepherds. So that really doesn't give us anything to go on. We need to dig a little deeper, and we need to look at the culture that was present during this time. So that's exactly what I did. I'd never really thought about it and thought about the shepherds in any other light than what I had been told or what I had seen in nativity sets. That was until last year when I saw an Instagram post from Dave Adamson. Dave was one of the first online pastors at a church, and he started in 2008. He's also done an extensive study in Hebrew and the Bible in general. This guy knows his stuff, and I believe he is a trustworthy source. What he posted that day flipped this image of how I viewed the shepherds on its head, and it also made me really excited. Even though I trusted what he was saying, I also wanted to research it for myself and dive deeper into scripture. So that's exactly what I did, and I am so excited to share what I found with you. Now, before we go any further, to really find the context of scripture, you have to take yourself out of the equation. The culture was completely different than what we have today, especially in the culture we have in America. So with that in mind, let's move forward. In biblical times, shepherds were typically the youngest in the family. And around the ages of 8 and 9 years old, they would start to go out into the fields. The youngest boys would shepherd the larger livestock, while the youngest girls would typically shepherd the goats and the sheep. If the family didn't have any girls or not enough daughters, the youngest son would also get assigned to the sheep and goat duty. We can actually find proof of this in a couple different places in scripture. First, in 1 Samuel 16:10 through 11. Now this is when Samuel comes to Jesse after the Lord has rejected Saul as king. And in verse 10, it starts like this. Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. But Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He is tending to the sheep." Jesse didn't have any daughters, so David, the youngest, had the job of tending to the sheep. The fact that David wasn't there to be presented with his older brothers shows us that he was overlooked by his family and probably viewed as the runt of the group. He would have been the last one chosen for anything of importance by man's standards, but God specifically chose David for something greater. That definitely gives some validity that the youngest of the family would have been the shepherd. But does it prove the possibility that the youngest females would have been shepherds? Well, let's go on to Exodus 2:16 through 17. It says this. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters who came as usual to draw water and fill the water troughs for their father's flocks. But some other shepherds came and chased them away. So Moses jumped up and rescued the girls from the shepherds. Then he drew water for their flocks. Here we see these 7 daughters tending to their flocks, just as shepherds would have. In verse 17, when it says some other shepherds, it really makes me think that these 7 daughters would have also been viewed as shepherds, which would fit the findings of the youngest daughters would have been tending the sheep and goats. However, it never comes out and says that they were shepherds. I feel like if this was an infomercial, we would be arriving at the point where the host says, "But wait, there's more," because I found more. And it's a big piece of evidence. But we have to go back towards the beginning of the Bible to find it. So in Genesis 29, we see Jacob seeing Rachel for the first time. Genesis 29:9 says this: Jacob was still talking with them when Rachel arrived with her father's flock, for she was a shepherd. Now, unlike the verse in Exodus where it doesn't name the daughters specifically as shepherds, you can't argue that it clearly states that Rachel was a shepherd. That gives so much value to the idea that young kids, and specifically young girls, could have been the shepherds that we read about in Scripture. So, if we take what we've just learned about shepherds and we go to the story of Jesus' birth, it's highly likely that the shepherds that the angels proclaimed the birth of Jesus to would have been young children, possibly ages 8 through 14. And this also means it's possible to think that the first ones who heard about Jesus' birth were young girl shepherds. And if we know that shepherds were viewed as the lowest of the low, and also that at that time women and children were viewed as the lowest of the low, it's really not surprising that the shepherds were probably young kids, and more likely young girls, the lowest of the low. But God, just like David, God is known for using those who are overlooked to accomplish something great for his glory. Now, I would be doing you a disservice if I left this next part out, because the idea that the shepherds in the Christmas story were young girls, it fits the narrative of Jesus. The more and more the research I do, I truly believe that there is a huge possibility that those shepherds were young girls. So, with that in mind, let's look at the narrative of Jesus. First, at his birth, the angel of the Lord appeared to the shepherds, which I believe was a group of young girls, announcing that Jesus was born. Second, the first person that Jesus revealed he was the Messiah to was the Samaritan woman at the well. And third, at the resurrection of Jesus, when the women arrived at the tomb early in the morning and the stone had been rolled away, an angel appeared to the women to proclaim that Jesus had risen from the dead, just as he said it would happen. In these 3 important moments in Jesus' life, God chose those that were viewed as the lowest of the low to share the good news with. If that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will. I said it before, and I'll say it again. We don't know for sure if the group of shepherds were young girls. It is a huge possibility, and it's one that I think changes the story that we've always thought we've known. It doesn't change the fact that Jesus was born to a virgin, lived a sinless life, then died on a cross, and 3 days later rose again. But what it does show is the nature of God and his love for all people, even those who are viewed as the lowest of low by all other worldly standards. Thanks for listening to Real Talk with Megan. Remember, you are not alone. Seeking help is a sign of strength, and taking care of your mental health is just as important as taking care of your physical health. We'll see you next time for more honest conversations.